1. Blanche Taylor Moore. Blanche Taylor Moore seemed like a devout churchgoer, the kind of woman who quoted scripture, sang hymns, and looked after the sick. But behind that southern charm was a chilling pattern. Husbands, lovers, and acquaintances who got mysteriously ill and died. Born in North Carolina in 1933, Blanche had the outward appearance of a traditional housewife. She worked at a grocery store, attended church faithfully, and was known in her community. But in 1986, her fiancé, Reverend Dwight Moore, suddenly fell violently ill. Doctors were baffled until toxicology tests revealed an alarming amount of arsenic in his system. He survived, but just barely. And his diagnosis triggered a deeper investigation. Authorities began exhuming the bodies of other men in Blanche's life. Her first husband, James Taylor, had died in 1973 under suspicious circumstances. A former boyfriend, Raymond Reed, also died mysteriously. In both cases, arsenic was found in their remains. What emerged was a pattern too disturbing to ignore. Blanche didn't shoot or stab her victims, she slowly poisoned them over time, watching as they deteriorated. In each case, she was the grieving widow or loyal partner, standing by their hospital beds while quietly orchestrating their deaths. In 1990, Blanche Taylor Moore was convicted of first-degree murder in the death of Raymond Reed and sentenced to death. She became one of the few women on North Carolina's death row, a place she still remains decades later. She's often called the Death Row Widow, and her case has inspired books, documentaries, and true crime episodes. But what makes her story especially haunting isn't just the method, it's the mask. Blanche wasn't a stranger lurking in the dark. She was a woman pouring your coffee, fluffing your pillow, reading you scripture, while your body shut down cell by cell. Today, Blanche Taylor Moore remains a living example of how evil can wear a smile. And wait. 2. Angelina Rodriguez. Angelina Rodriguez looked like a woman desperate to rebuild her life, a mother, a teacher's aide, and newly remarried to a man who offered her stability. But just 4 months into the marriage, her husband was dead. The official cause? A freak accident. The truth? Much colder. In September 2000, 41-year-old Frank Rodriguez died suddenly in their California home. At first, doctors thought it was natural causes, but when Angelina pushed hard for his $250,000 life insurance payout and insisted on cremation almost immediately, red flags began to rise. Police reopened the case. What they found was chilling. Frank hadn't died naturally. He'd been poisoned with antifreeze, ethylene glycol, a substance that shuts down internal organs while leaving few initial symptoms. Investigators also discovered traces of oleander, a deadly plant, in his system. Both poisons were linked to items found in the Rodriguez home. As detectives dug deeper, another disturbing truth emerged. Just 2 years prior, Angelina's infant daughter had died after swallowing a pacifier. She sued the manufacturer and received a settlement. But now, investigators began to question whether even that tragedy had been an accident or part of a pattern. In 2003, Angelina Rodriguez was convicted of first-degree murder. The prosecution argued she married Frank solely for the life insurance money and had planned his death from the start. Her calm demeanor, the premeditation, and the use of multiple poisons painted the picture of a woman who didn't kill in rage, but calculation. The jury sentenced her to death, and she became one of the few women on California's death row. Years later, her death sentence was overturned on appeal, but her conviction was upheld. She now serves life without the possibility of parole. To this day, Angelina Rodriguez insists on her innocence, but the evidence remains: bottles, browser searches, and a trail of bodies that all point back to her. The antifreeze widow didn't need a weapon, she just needed trust and time. 3. Velma Barfield. Velma Barfield sat in the front row at church every Sunday, Bible in hand, face solemn with faith. To her neighbors in rural North Carolina, she was the picture of a Christian widow. Quiet, humble, charitable, but behind that holy image was one of the most deceptive serial poisoners in American history. Born in 1932, Velma had a troubled past. She battled chronic pain, depression, and addiction to prescription drugs. Her first husband died under suspicious circumstances, and not long after, she remarried. Her second husband, Jennings Barfield, fell mysteriously ill and died, allegedly of heart failure. But the pattern didn't stop there. Over the next few years, more people around Velma began to die. Her own mother, Lillian Bullard, died suddenly after showing signs of poisoning. Then came her boyfriend, Stuart Taylor, a kind man who supported her financially and emotionally. Velma forged checks in his name. When he confronted her, he ended up dead. By that point, even her closest friends started to feel uneasy around her. The truth came to light when an autopsy revealed arsenic in Stuart's body. Investigators exhumed other victims and found similar results. Lethal amounts of poison coursing through their systems. When questioned, Velma confessed to the murders. She claimed remorse, but said she never meant to kill, only to make them sick so she could care for them and win sympathy. Her trial shocked the nation. A church-going grandmother turned serial killer? It was almost unthinkable. The prosecution argued that Velma used her image, her appearance, her faith, her femininity, as a mask. A way to deflect suspicion while methodically ending the lives of those closest to her, one by one. In 1978, Velma Barfield was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. She became the first woman in the United States to be executed after the Supreme Court reinstated the death penalty in 1976, and the first woman ever executed by lethal injection in the U.S. On November 2, 1984, Velma was put to death at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. In her final moments, she asked for forgiveness and spoke softly to the prison chaplain. Her last meal was a bag of cheese doodles and a can of Coca-Cola. To some, Velma was a broken woman, shaped by abuse and addiction. To others, she was a calculating killer who used religion as a disguise. Either way, her legacy endures as a haunting example of how evil doesn't always look like evil. Sometimes, it looks like a kind grandmother in a church pew. 4. Anne Bilansky. Anne Bilansky wasn't supposed to be the face of murder. She was a housewife in mid-19th century Minnesota, modest, educated, and married to a well-known clerk in the U.S. Senate. But behind her domestic routine and polite manners, a scandal was unfolding that would end in poison, betrayal, and a public execution. It was 1859, and her husband, Stanislaus Bilansky, had suddenly fallen ill. What began as nausea and abdominal pain turned into violent convulsions. Within days, he was dead. His rapid decline raised eyebrows, but there was little medical understanding at the time. Still, whispers began to circulate, and those whispers pointed to Anne. Investigators discovered that Anne had purchased arsenic weeks earlier. She claimed it was to kill rats in the cellar. But the autopsy of her husband revealed something else. His body was filled with that same poison. A closer look into her personal life uncovered a motive: an alleged affair with her cousin, John Walker. Letters between them hinted at a romantic entanglement, and some believed Anne saw her husband as an obstacle to happiness and freedom. The case went to trial, and despite weak forensic standards and circumstantial evidence, the jury was swayed. Anne Bilansky was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death by hanging. She maintained her innocence until the very end, claiming she was the victim of gossip, poor science, and a rush to judgment. But in a time when women were expected to be obedient and pure, the image of a calculating wife using poison to remove her husband shattered public trust. Newspapers sensationalized the trial, branding her a cold-blooded murderess who had brought shame to womanhood. On March 23, 1860, Anne was led to the gallows in St. Paul, becoming the first and only woman ever executed by the state of Minnesota. A crowd of thousands gathered, some out of morbid curiosity, others out of outrage or pity. Before the noose was tightened, she stood silent, hands folded. Some claimed she was calm, others said she looked numb with disbelief. Her death didn't end the debate. For decades, scholars and writers have questioned whether the evidence was strong enough to warrant execution. Some argue she was a victim of moral panic, a woman condemned more for stepping outside Victorian norms than for actual guilt. But regardless of innocence or guilt, the story of Anne Bilansky remains chilling. She wasn't a stranger with a weapon. She was a wife, a familiar face at church, a woman who shared meals, secrets, and a home with the man she was accused of killing. And for that, she became one of the earliest examples of a housewife turned killer, and one of the first women in U.S. history to die for it. 5. Rhonda Belle Martin. Rhonda Belle Martin looked like the portrait of Southern motherhood. She lived in a modest Alabama home, spent her evenings in a rocking chair, and kept framed photos of her children and husbands around her living room. But behind that grandmotherly smile was one of the most disturbing serial poisoners in American history. A woman who slowly killed the people closest to her, one by one, with nothing more than a bottle of rat poison and a gentle hand. Born in 1907, Rhonda married multiple times, and each marriage ended in tragedy. One husband died, then another, then another. Over the years, 5 of her 6 husbands died mysteriously, all after suffering from similar symptoms: nausea, weakness, and sudden death. But it didn't stop there. 3 of her own children also died in ways that, at the time, were thought to be natural, until it was too late. For years, no one suspected Rhonda. She was calm, kind, and grieving. Friends pitied her. Doctors believed she was just a woman cursed by bad luck and fragile health around her. But eventually, the pattern became impossible to ignore. A new husband fell ill and survived. Suspicious? Investigators ordered exhumations of her previous family members. The results were chilling. Traces of arsenic were found in multiple victims, including children. Under interrogation, Rhonda confessed, casually, almost proudly. She admitted to poisoning 5 family members, though many believe the number could be far higher. Her motive? She claimed it wasn't hatred or greed. She said she just wanted sympathy. Attention, the feeling of being loved and cared for during grief. She even requested that her victims be buried near her, and kept their photographs in her home. A grim reminder of her own crimes. Rhonda Belle Martin was convicted and sentenced to death in Alabama. In 1957, she was executed by electric chair, becoming one of the rare women in U.S. history to face capital punishment, and one of the only mothers to be put to death for killing her own children. Her case horrified the nation. Newspapers dubbed her the rocking chair widow, painting the image of an elderly woman lulling herself to sleep after slowly poisoning the people she claimed to love. There was no rage, no struggle, no visible malice, only a quiet, methodical descent into calculated murder. To this day, Rhonda's story raises uncomfortable questions. How many people die quietly in their homes with symptoms no one questions? How many killers wear the face of maternal grief? And how long can they go unnoticed? Rhonda Belle Martin didn't strike in a moment of passion. She planned, she waited, and she rocked gently through it all. 6. Kelly Gissendaner. To her community in suburban Georgia, Kelly Gissendaner was known as a pastor's wife, a mother of 3, and a woman of faith. She sang in the church choir, attended Bible study, and smiled politely at neighbors. But behind closed doors, her marriage to Douglas Gissendaner was unraveling. And instead of choosing divorce, Kelly made a decision that would stun the nation. She plotted her husband's murder and convinced her young lover to carry it out. In 1997, Kelly persuaded her boyfriend, Gregory Owen, a 21-year-old who was infatuated with her, to ambush her husband. She told him that Doug was abusive, manipulative, and that the only way they could be together was if he was gone. Owen, under her influence, waited in the shadows outside the couple's home. When Douglas Gissendaner arrived that night, Owen forced him into a car, drove him to a remote area, and brutally stabbed him to death. Then he set the car on fire. Kelly didn't wield the weapon. She wasn't at the scene, but she was the mastermind. She had helped plan the murder, provided details, and was waiting calmly when Owen returned. Later, she even reported her husband missing, pretending to be distraught, and comforted their children while knowing exactly what had happened. When investigators caught Owen, he quickly turned on Kelly. In exchange for a plea deal, he testified against her, revealing text messages, letters, and confessions that proved she orchestrated the crime. He received a life sentence. But Kelly? She was sentenced to death, the only woman on Georgia's death row at the time. Her execution would be delayed for years. During her time in prison, Kelly underwent a profound transformation. She became a model inmate, earned a theology degree, and counseled other prisoners. Even guards and prison staff spoke of her kindness and emotional growth. Some called for clemency, arguing that she had changed. Even Douglas and Kelly's children, the same ones she had deceived, eventually forgave her and begged for her life to be spared. But the justice system would not yield. In September 2015, after nearly 2 decades on death row, Kelly Gissendaner was executed by lethal injection. Her final words were directed to her children and to Doug's family. She expressed sorrow, love, and regret. And then she sang Amazing Grace as the drugs began to take effect. Her case sparked national debate. Some viewed her execution as justice, a woman who had manipulated others into committing murder and shown no remorse until she was caught. Others saw it as a failure of mercy, especially in a system that often gives men more leniency than women who never actually committed the physical act. Kelly Gissendaner will be remembered not just for the crime, but for the contradiction. A mother, a minister's wife, a believer, who sent a man to die, and followed him there. 7. Elizabeth van Valkenburgh. Long before forensics, fingerprinting, or psychological profiling, there was Elizabeth van Valkenburgh, a quiet widow living in upstate New York during the 1840s. She didn't carry a weapon. She didn't leave a trail of blood. Her weapon was far more subtle and far more chilling. Elizabeth used arsenic and patience. Twice married and twice widowed, Elizabeth presented herself as a pious, soft-spoken woman living a simple rural life. But when her second husband, John van Valkenburgh, began showing signs of illness, neighbors grew suspicious. His symptoms weren't typical of any local illness. He vomited, he convulsed, and then, suddenly, he died. Within days, Elizabeth's behavior raised eyebrows. She seemed indifferent, cold even. And worse, people remembered something eerily familiar. Her first husband had died in nearly the same manner. An autopsy was rare for the time, but it was done, and it confirmed what locals feared. Arsenic had been found in John's system. Elizabeth was arrested, and under questioning she confessed, not just to poisoning John but to poisoning her first husband as well. She claimed both had been abusive. That one had beaten her and the other had emotionally destroyed her. In her eyes, this was justice. In the eyes of the court, it was murder. The trial drew enormous public attention. In 1845, a woman on trial for double murder was virtually unheard of, and poisoning was considered the most sinister of crimes. Cold, calculated, and cowardly. There were no questions of mistaken identity, no argument of self-defense. Elizabeth's own words sealed her fate. She was sentenced to death by hanging. On the morning of April 24, 1846, Elizabeth van Valkenburgh became the first and only woman ever executed in New York's Greene County. Her hanging was public, as was customary at the time, and drew a crowd of spectators. Some came for justice. Others came out of morbid curiosity, eager to see what kind of woman could do such a thing. What they found was a figure who looked more like someone's grandmother than a killer. Her final statement was brief, but haunting. She expressed regret, sorrow, and then asked for forgiveness from her children. She was 45 years old. Elizabeth's legacy became part of early American folklore, a tale told around firesides and in courtrooms. She was the quiet housewife with arsenic in her pocket, a woman pushed too far, or simply born with a darkness the world couldn't see. In the years that followed, some would argue she was a product of abuse. Others called her a manipulative murderer who knew exactly what she was doing. But either way, Elizabeth van Valkenburgh earned her place in history. Not just as a widow twice over, but as the ghost of Arsenic Hollow. 8. Wendi Andriano. Wendi Andriano looked like a devoted wife. She stood by her husband through his cancer diagnosis, she worked while he stayed home, and from the outside, she seemed like a woman doing her best. But what unfolded in a small Phoenix apartment in October 2000 would shatter that illusion forever. Her husband, Joe Andriano, was terminally ill. Diagnosed with a rare form of cancer, his body was deteriorating. But his mind remained sharp. And that, perhaps, was the problem. Joe began to grow suspicious of Wendi's behavior. She'd been out late, frequently socializing. There were rumors of affairs, and Joe, growing weaker by the day, felt something wasn't right. He confided in a friend that he believed his wife was poisoning him. He even said, chillingly, that if anything happened to him, Wendi was to blame. On October 8, 2000, emergency responders arrived to a horrifying scene. Joe Andriano was dead, but not from cancer. His body was found with multiple blunt force injuries, a fractured skull, and stab wounds. The final blow, authorities said, was delivered with a bar stool. There were signs he had also ingested sodium azide, a highly toxic chemical often used in labs. Traces of it were found in a bottle of tequila in the apartment. The investigators quickly turned their attention to Wendi. What they discovered painted a picture of a woman living a double life. Wendi had forged medical documents to try and obtain life insurance. She'd been frequenting nightclubs and was reportedly involved with other men. Financial stress had mounted, and Joe's death, if it looked like a natural end, could have solved everything. But the crime was anything but subtle. During the trial, the prosecution laid out a damning case. Wendi had poisoned her husband to weaken him, then bludgeoned and stabbed him when the poison didn't work fast enough. They said it was premeditated, calculated, cold. Wendi took the stand in her own defense, claiming she acted in self-defense, that Joe had become aggressive. But the jury didn't buy it. The evidence of forgery, deceit, and calculated planning overwhelmed any claims of panic or fear. In 2004, Wendi Andriano was sentenced to death, making her one of only a handful of women on Arizona's death row. Today, she sits in Perryville prison, still appealing her sentence, still proclaiming her innocence. But the facts of the case remain. A dying man was found beaten, poisoned, and stabbed, and the woman who vowed to care for him until the end is the one who ended his life. What makes Wendi's case so unsettling isn't just the brutality, it's the betrayal. The contrast between her public persona and the violence hidden beneath it. She wasn't just a wife. She was the last person Joe saw, the last voice he heard, and the one who turned love into a weapon. 9. Janie Lou Gibbs. In the quiet town of Cordele, Georgia, Janie Lou Gibbs was the kind of woman people trusted. A devout Baptist, always present at church, a loving wife and mother of 3 boys. No one suspected that beneath her gentle smile was a woman capable of unimaginable betrayal. But between 1966 and 1967, Janie Lou Gibbs poisoned 5 members of her own family, including all 3 of her sons. It began with her husband Marvin. One day, he fell violently ill and died within hours. Doctors chalked it up to liver disease, and Janie collected the insurance money. Soon after, her youngest son, Marvin Jr., died under similarly mysterious circumstances. Then another son, then her grandson, and finally her oldest son, Robert. Each time the deaths were sudden. Each time Janie received a life insurance payout, and each time she appeared grief-stricken, leaning on her faith, surrounded by a sympathetic community. But suspicion eventually caught up with her. After the death of her 3rd son, the surviving daughter-in-law pushed for an autopsy. The results were chilling. Traces of arsenic were found in the body. Authorities exhumed the other family members, and the pattern became undeniable. All had been poisoned, and all roads led back to Janie Lou Gibbs. Investigators soon uncovered that Janie had been feeding her family homemade meals laced with arsenic. She had reportedly obtained the poison under the pretense of pest control. But this wasn't just about death, it was about dollars. In each case, Janie had taken out modest life insurance policies on her family members shortly before their deaths, and she had collected every time. When questioned, Janie didn't show the coldness of a serial killer. Instead, she wept. She claimed she'd done it to spare her family from suffering, or to help them get to heaven faster. But the evidence told another story. A woman systematically killing her loved ones for financial gain. A mother poisoning her own children. In 1968, Janie Lou Gibbs was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder. Though prosecutors initially considered the death penalty, a judge ruled her mentally unfit to stand trial. She was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and committed to a state mental hospital. Eventually, she was declared competent and sentenced to life in prison. Janie died in 2010 after decades behind bars. To this day, her case remains one of the most disturbing examples of familial betrayal in American criminal history. Not because the murders were violent or public, but because they were slow, silent, and served with a spoon. She wasn't just a killer, she was a mother. And for her victims, the comfort of home became a place of quiet terror. In the end, Janie Lou Gibbs didn't just break hearts, she shattered the very idea of safety within a family. 10. Joann Curley. To neighbors and co-workers in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, Joann Curley seemed like any other young wife, polite, quiet, and dutiful. She was just 20 years old when she married her husband Bobby Curley, a man who adored her. But behind closed doors, Joann was harboring a secret so cold it would eventually shock the entire state. In 1991, just 5 months into their marriage, Bobby Curley began to suffer from mysterious and excruciating symptoms. He was vomiting violently, losing weight, and experiencing unbearable pain in his abdomen and limbs. Doctors were baffled. For over a year, Bobby's health deteriorated until he died a slow and agonizing death at just 32 years old. His last words, gasped in confusion and terror, were, "Why is this happening to me?" It would take 3 more years before anyone discovered the truth. In 1996, Pennsylvania authorities reopened the case after Joann received a suspicious $300,000 life insurance payout from Bobby's death, money she had quickly spent on a new car, vacations, and shopping sprees. Investigators exhumed Bobby's body, and this time the autopsy revealed something horrifying: massive levels of thallium, a highly toxic metal used in rat poison. Joann had been slowly poisoning her husband by lacing his drinks with thallium over the course of several months. As he grew sicker, she kept up appearances, even taking him to the hospital and pretending to care for him. But behind that mask of concern was a woman waiting for the insurance money to hit her account. When confronted with the evidence, Joann eventually confessed. Her motive, she claimed, was abuse, though no clear history or evidence of domestic violence was ever presented in court. What prosecutors saw was something different: a cold, calculated plan to eliminate a man who trusted her with his life, all for financial gain. In 1996, Joann Curley was sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison for third-degree murder, a deal struck to avoid trial on more severe charges. She served the full 20 years and was released in 2016, having never publicly apologized or shown remorse. To this day, Bobby Curley's family believes justice was never fully served. His father, Bill Curley, became a passionate advocate for victim rights, saying, "She murdered my son, and for 20 years, she still got to live." Joann Curley didn't use a gun, she didn't use a knife. She used trust and poison to slowly erase the man she vowed to love. Hers is a story that haunts Pennsylvania's criminal history. Because when murder comes in teaspoons, it often hides behind a smile. 11. Amy Murray. Amy Murray was the kind of wife people rarely suspected. A nurse at the Veterans Affairs Hospital in Missouri, she lived a quiet suburban life with her husband Joshua Murray and their young son. But beneath that calm exterior was a secret. A secret so cold, it was literally brewed in antifreeze. On the surface, Amy's marriage appeared stable. But in 2018, she began an affair with an inmate at the Jefferson City Correctional Center. The man was serving a life sentence for murder, and Amy had fallen deeply into a fantasy of starting over with him, one that didn't include her husband. So she made a deadly decision. In December of that year, Amy mixed ethylene glycol, commonly found in antifreeze, into her husband's food. As Joshua lay dying at home, unable to move or call for help, Amy left the house, went to McDonald's with her son, and acted as though nothing was wrong. When she returned, Joshua was dead. But Amy didn't stop there. She set the house on fire, hoping the flames would destroy any trace of poison in her husband's body. She told police that when she came back from dinner, she found the home ablaze and her husband unresponsive. But investigators quickly grew suspicious. The fire had clear signs of accelerant, and the timeline didn't add up. Forensic tests later revealed ethylene glycol in Joshua's system, a telltale marker of antifreeze poisoning. Amy's digital footprint sealed the case. Texts between her and the inmate revealed the plot. She had told him that once her husband was dead, she'd be free to be with him, and they could be together forever. Amy Murray was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, arson, and armed criminal action. In 2022, she accepted a plea deal, admitting guilt and receiving a 25-year prison sentence without the possibility of parole. The irony? The man she killed for, the inmate she dreamed of building a life with, remains locked up, sentenced to life. Her dream of starting fresh became a prison of her own making. Amy didn't kill in a fit of rage or in a moment of passion. Her crime was methodical, emotionless, and cruel. She didn't just want to be free, she wanted to erase the life she had, one poisoned meal and one fake alibi at a time. 12. Kouri Richins. Kouri Richins was a Utah real estate agent, wife, and mother of 3. On the outside, she embodied success, a glowing smile, thriving business, and a picture-perfect family. But beneath the surface, her marriage was falling apart. And according to prosecutors, Kouri decided the only way out was to kill her husband, and then write a children's book about grief to cover it up. On the night of March 3, 2022, Kouri allegedly made her husband Eric a drink. A Moscow Mule, his favorite. He drank it and soon collapsed in bed. Kouri claimed she had fallen asleep with one of the children and returned to find him cold. But the autopsy would reveal a chilling truth. Eric had 5 times the lethal dose of fentanyl in his system. It wasn't just a drug overdose, it was a calculated poisoning. Investigators discovered Kouri had made multiple purchases of illicit fentanyl pills in the weeks leading up to Eric's death. She reportedly told a contact she wanted some Michael Jackson stuff, a reference to the powerful drugs that ended the pop star's life. The pills were traced back to an acquaintance who later told police they'd sold her the narcotics at Kouri's request. But the case doesn't stop at the poisoning. Just a year after Eric's death, Kouri self-published a children's book titled Are You With Me? A story meant to help kids process the loss of a parent. She did media interviews, promoted the book as a healing tool, and portrayed herself as a grieving widow. All the while, investigators were building a case against her. In May 2023, Kouri Richins was arrested and charged with aggravated murder and multiple counts of drug possession with intent to distribute. While she has pleaded not guilty, the evidence, including drug purchases, financial motives, and her behavior after Eric's death, paints a grim picture. Prosecutors say Kouri stood to gain nearly $2 million in life insurance payouts and had been secretly struggling with debt and marital conflict. Far from a crime of passion, they argue this was a premeditated act masked by charm, image, and an eerie attempt at redemption through children's literature. She has not been sentenced yet, and currently faces life in prison without parole if convicted. Though she has not received the death penalty, her story closes out a list of women whose crimes began in the kitchen, the bedroom, and the illusion of domestic bliss, but ended in courtrooms, prison cells, and body bags. In every one of these cases, the method was quiet, subtle, deceptively simple. A cup of tea, a glass of wine, a homemade stew, or in modern times, a spiked cocktail laced with fentanyl. There was no screaming, no gunfire, no struggle, just a slow descent into death that often began with trust and ended with betrayal. What makes these crimes so haunting isn't just that the victims were husbands, it's that they were poisoned by the one person they believed would never hurt them. Their wives, the women who shared their beds, their meals, their homes, the mothers of their children, the ones they loved. That's the horror, because poison is the weapon of someone who doesn't want to be caught. Someone who smiles at breakfast and kills by dinner. Someone who can watch you die slowly and still tuck the kids in at night. It's not a crime of rage, it's a crime of patience. Many of these men never even knew they were dying. They didn't suspect the aches, the nausea, the weakness. They thought it was stress or the flu. They trusted their wives enough to eat what was given, to drink what was handed to them. And by the time the truth came out, it was far too late. In the end, these weren't crimes of passion, they were crimes of calculation. From arsenic in the 1800s to antifreeze and fentanyl today, the poison changes, but the story doesn't. These housewives didn't just kill. They plotted, they prepared, and they poured the poison with a calm hand. It's a chilling reminder that danger doesn't always wear a mask or carry a gun. Sometimes it wears an apron and waits with a wine glass in hand. When a wife becomes the executioner, there's no last meal, just the last sip. If this video gripped you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more true crime stories that reveal the dark undercurrents of ordinary lives. And let us know in the comments, which case did you find most chilling, and why does poison still feel like the most intimate weapon of all?